I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting of Monday, August 5th, 2019. Clerk, have roll call.
Mayor Berman?
Here.
Trustee Gavino?
Here.
Trustee Lowry?
Here.
Trustee Curtis? Here. Trustee Carroll?
Here.
Trustee Martinez?
Here.
Trustee Gately?
Here.
Our first item of discussion is our Randall Road Commercial Center. Mr. Toth.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor. Today we'll be talking about Lot 2 in the Randall Road Commercial Center. This might sound familiar, this discussion. We actually discussed it, concept plan, before the village board on December 17th of last year. So this has actually been before the board previously through some sort of concept review. What they're looking to do is receive entitlement on Lot 2 for multifamily residential. Currently, the PUD, which is approved in 2001, is for a B2 commercial district. The property owner, I don't see him here right now, but they're looking to get the multifamily residential entitlement on Lot 2 only. So again, that's north of the Shodine property and south of the storage center. They did submit a site plan, which you have in front of you. I made copies of, and I can broadcast it here. The Plan Commission reviewed the zoning request. They recommended approval of this on their June 4th meeting. They did make comment on the site plan itself. They actually wanted more pedestrian connectivity internally to the site, and also linking the pedestrian connectivity to the east where there's a sidewalk along Miller Drive there. And they wanted more dumpster enclosures. I don't want to get too hung up on the site plan. The site plan did not come through for approval just yet. They're looking to get the entitlements on the property, which allow them to do the zoning. Then they'd have to come back at a later date once everything was approved to bring the final site plan through. Also, too, in order to get this entitlement through the zoning, they would actually have to have a public hearing before the board at a future date to amend the annexation agreement as well. So what they're looking to do right now is just for multifamily residential. They could not do townhomes, single-family homes. It would be specifically multifamily residential on Lot 2 of Randall Road Commercial Center. So with that, I don't see the applicant here, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address those.
Is that ample parking, Mike?
Yeah, it's actually, I did the analysis, it's actually overparked.
I like the concept.
It's 137 over 132. I remember reading that. So.
Yeah, I think I counted 140 though.
Yeah.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. So the comprehensive plan actually recommends commercial on the property, but this is removed from Randall Road. You have the properties to the east of this, then that sort of bifurcate the area, Miller Drive. And then you have the residential here. And this has been sort of a pattern lately. We've done a similar type thing over at Randall Highlands to the north, where they put the townhomes in behind the hotel, and then the relearning of the orchard piece out at Orchard and Oak, where the springs went in. So we're seeing this trend. This being a smaller property of only about 5 acres. I think they're showing right now about 66 units, so it would be on the smaller side. But right now they're just trying to get that the entitlement work done.
Okay, looks good.
I think it's a good project.
Yeah.
I think the parking, we certainly have learned that parking is a problem, but I think in a gated community like this, or one that has one entrance, that
Yeah, the intent would be to be a gated community.
they're not going to be parking out in the village streets. So it looks to me like it's
Thank you.
a go.
Yeah.
Anyone feel otherwise?
No, it's fine.
Item number 2, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 2 on the agenda, if you give me 1 second, Mike. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, you want it?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're switching computers. was thinking for a second there. There we go. All right. Okay, item number 2 on the agenda tonight is a discussion about the recreational cannabis law. Basically, we're going to go through a very brief presentation. As you probably are aware, the state passed a new cannabis regulation and tax act that goes into effect January 1st. In the meantime, communities are working right now to determine what their options are, and basically it all comes down to 2 options, allowing sales in your community of cannabis or banning them in your community. So what most towns are doing at this point is we're just trying to give village boards overviews of the state law, make sure that you are aware of what's out there as far as what the law entails, what the village's options are, and then ultimately trying to get direction from the village board on where we want to keep the process going in which direction. Now, in this case, I will point out that it's probably best if we go through the PowerPoint and then have the questions at the end, because my guess is you're going to have questions that are going to be answered as the slides progress. So we kind of put them in an order on purpose to make sure that we kind of built up to different things. Also, should also make a point that this is interesting specifically to North Aurora compared to some other communities, because unlike many communities, North Aurora is one of the few that has a medical marijuana dispensary already in town. I believe a representative from PharmaCannabis is in the crowd. Under this new law, the medical marijuana dispensaries will have the right to cohabitate with recreational sales as long as the village board chooses not to ban them, in which case we've already been made aware by the medical marijuana dispensary in town that they are interested in selling recreational marijuana in North Aurora. So with all that being said, I'm going to walk through this presentation, and we will definitely try to answer whatever questions you have at the end. So the first thing we're going to go through, and I'm not going to, it's a lot of information here, so we're going to try to go through, we don't have to go through all the definitions, but we put in the packet for the public, for the village board, for everyone in the audience tonight, just to be able to see, these are the terms for the different businesses and dispensaries. Essentially, what we're focused this conversation tonight will be mostly focused on retail sales, which is dispensaries. There's other types of cannabis businesses that are regulated by the new state law, but for tonight's purposes, we're really focused on retail sales. So here, the second slide, we were able to provide the types of businesses. So once again, these are under the law. These are the different types of organizations that are out there that can be regulated. In any community where they allow any of these types of businesses, they would have to be zoned in. So for instance, in our case in North Aurora, none of these businesses are zoned currently. So the only zoning that we have for marijuana would be medical marijuana, which is a permitted use in the B3 district and I believe the B2 district. So this is where we start to get into the law a little bit, the meat and potatoes, so to speak. So we highlighted that Illinois residents 21 and over are able to possess cannabis legally beginning January 1st. We put the amounts underneath. So by state law, at any one time, anyone can have 30 grams, which is about an ounce, 5 grams of cannabis concentrate, or 500 milligrams of THC. Be honest with you, we had to do a little bit of research to actually determine what that equated to, because none of us on staff really knew what 30 grams of marijuana would actually equate to. So if you have any questions about that, we can, but we essentially came up with, based on some research we did on a medical marijuana site, to put this in perspective, an ounce or 30 grams, according to that site, one cannabis or marijuana joint is about, 1 gram would equal 1 to 2 joints, I believe it was. Is that correct? So we came up with 30 grams would equal essentially 45 joints. So there you go. Possession will be permissible in a motor vehicle. We'll get to that in a little bit with the police department, but obviously if someone's going to be allowed to buy it legally, they have to be able to transport it home. So it will be, but there are provisions in which they have to keep it sealed in a secured place, very similar to alcohol in the same sense. Consumption of cannabis. So under the new law, Basically, the only major place you can use it is in your home, basically, or someone else's home, a private residence. You can, and we highlighted this specifically on the second part where it says on the premises of a licensed cannabis business, you have the right under the law that if you allow retail sales in your community at that dispensary, you can allow people to partake at the dispensary. We're not really at the recommendation point at this point, but we can talk about that at a later time, but I just wanted to make sure the board knew that that was an option if retail sales move forward, that would be your way to control that. You do not have to allow it at a dispensary. Prohibited locations, and this is important, public places such as streets, parking lots, buildings. You can't have it while you're driving, near school grounds, around anyone under 21. So this is all in the state law. These are all typical regulations that you would see to try to keep it, once again, into private residences. So basically, there's the dispensaries themselves have a few parameters that are set in the state law already. Some of them we put under the first two, that you may operate between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. and then you must be 1,500 feet from other dispensaries. According to our understanding of the law, and the law is about 620 pages, having gone through this, having met as a staff several times, having talked to our village attorney, we believe that these aren't necessarily requirements. They're basically standards that the law set as a guideline. These first two, we believe that the village has the right, should we move forward with sales of recreational marijuana, the right to put additional reasonable, stricter requirements in. So for instance, instead of 1,500 feet between dispensaries, it's plausible that we could say we want them to be 2,000 feet apart or 2,500 feet apart, which would obviously reduce the amount available for multiples to locate in your community. Dispensary prohibitions. So these are things that's set, and we always say with the legalese, it's between shall, can't, or may. These are ones that are specifically you can't. So you can't have delivery services, you can't have drive-through windows. These are all set in the state law. Police involvement. I'm going to just ask Dave if he wants to, in a second here, jump in to just give a 30-second opinion on DUI enforcement, but it's going to be tricky. That's one of the concerns that at the staff level with DUI enforcement, it says here that you can use a validated chemical road test, but there is no standardized test that officers really give at this time. So that's going to be a tricky issue for the police department. But once again, it should be noted, and we're going to get into this, if you should ban retail sales in your community, that does not ban the use of marijuana in your community, and that's an important thing to know. You can still buy marijuana in another community that sells it and still use it in North Aurora or any town that bans the sale of it. It can still be used in that community. So no matter where the dispensary is, whether it's in our town or any other town, the police department will be dealing with the traffic issues involved potentially with that. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just that, like with alcohol, there's portable roadside tests, breath machines, that's how you tell if somebody's intoxicated or not. They just blow into a machine and it gives you an instant reading. There's nothing like that right now with marijuana. It's got to be, a urine or a blood sample. So you can't do that roadside, of course. So the enforcement of it's going to be a little bit tougher until somebody invents something that you can do right there on the scene. So it's, and a lot of that stuff has to be sent out to a lab. The results have to come back. Then you can charge accordingly. So it will be a little bit tougher. And I know if you look at some of the studies from some of the other states, like Colorado, for example, their I'll call it a DUI, their rates have kind of skyrocketed, to be honest with you, when it comes to the marijuana driving related offenses. But the main thing and it's across the country, is that there is no immediate, we'll call it a roadside test to tell if somebody is over a certain limit when it comes to marijuana consumption and driving.
Is there a minimum safe limit? I mean,
Yeah, I meant to bring it with me, but I forgot. But they measure it in like microns or something like that, and there is a permissible level and then above that is you cannot have in your system and be considered a safe driver.
so like the .08, there'd be.
Yeah, there's an equivalent. Yeah.
Is that in the law?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How do they assess that?
That's done through either the blood or the urine testing, sent to a lab, and then they can tell the amount in there of the THC.
Chief, there's also, I mean, there's very limited things you can do in the field, but police officers are trained to do some type of field sobriety test.
Yeah, I mean, there is still drug detection. You know, you can't necessarily maybe tell exactly what type of drug they're on, but based on their driving, obviously marijuana has a smell to it. They may admit it. There's a few different factors. You could still put them through the sobriety tests that you would if you suspect them of drinking alcohol and driving. You would still do that. Mm-hmm. And if they show impairment, inability to pass the test, things like that, then you could make the arrest.
So, but you're relying on the subjectivity of the officer, like in doing the road test.
Yeah, and their experience and their training and everything. But yeah, otherwise it's the officer's observations basically.
Right.
Well, the same thing can be true if they're speeding or if they're swerving too. If they're speeding, you can pull them over and you figure it out, or if they're swerving around, and then they get pulled over.
Which is a lot of times how a regular DUI it results in an arrest is their driving habits or the way that they're driving.
I'm sorry.
In the event of, for example, a subject smoking marijuana 2 days ago, is that something that probably would be triggered on a urine test, correct? But would they be liable for under the influence?
More than likely, that 2 days like that isn't. I'm not a biologist. I can't tell you the exact science behind it. More than likely, something like that's not going to show up. If somebody consumed it 2 days ago, they wouldn't be showing signs of impairment. They shouldn't be, anyways.
But probably they will come out positive on a urine test, right?
I don't know. It might. I can't honestly answer that yes or no. I'm not exactly sure how long it stays in your system, and if it does stay in your system that long, how strong of a reading it would be.
Does it? I mean, is there information in the law that says for residents how much they can consume to get to that level? Like for example, like if you could say, if I drink 1 beer an hour, there's an equivalent that if you go to a restaurant, you don't drink more than 1 beer. But
I don't think there are necessarily guidelines, Mark, because there's different levels of how strong the marijuana is, and there may be somebody in the audience that can, if somebody's here from PharmaCann, they may be able to tell us better than that. But there's different levels of marijuana that has the higher THC in it. So you could smoke some of that, and it would be a lot higher than if you smoke something that's low grade. And it might not have.
And we're going to get to
it.
that in the PowerPoint. We actually talk about it's taxed differently by the state depending on the strength of the marijuana as well.
And they also have the gummy bears that don't have THC. So there's different products out on the market. So, and when you purchase it, they'll tell you what you're.
They don't have a scent either.
So the second part of this slide is the expungement of criminal records. So our police clerks and clerks all over the state will be going through and expunging local marijuana-related criminal records for those who are arrested with basically under 30 grams, and if it was a nonviolent arrest. So that'll be something that our staff will do automatically.
Right. They're still trying to sort through that because it gives you a time frame. Like within the next 2 years, certain records have to be expunged. Within the next 3 years, certain records have to be expunged. It's unfortunately very convoluted, and they've not put any training together yet on it. They are in the process of it, but it's going to be quite a job to do all that because one expungement can take a long time, let alone however many years they make us go back. There could be hundreds of them.
So 30 grams, that sounds like an awful lot, ain't it? I mean, it's
1 ounce.
Imagine an ounce of pot or weeds. It's just a lot, right? And the THC levels can be higher than your normal marijuana, correct? So 1 ounce could be a lot.
Yeah, depending on the strength, yeah.
1 ounce.
So under the next slide, current medical, what we wanted to do is give a lay of the land of what's currently happening right now with medical marijuana, since it's already established in our state. You see here we have, there's 55 medical cannabis dispensaries currently in 20 cultivation centers, over 46,000 patients in the state. And once again, of course, we wanted to highlight that we have an existing medical marijuana dispensary and that they have the right to apply for dispensing license. And that goes back to that they have the right to cohabitate. So once again, as a medical marijuana dispensary, they are going to be the first, so to speak, to have the rights to a license for retail sales of recreational, in which case we already are aware that our local dispensary is interested in doing so in our community. They can also apply for a secondary site, and there's a region, so there will be 75 conditional adult use licenses granted. And those will, we're anticipating, because it's based on population, I believe, they're anticipating that out of those, 47 will be essentially in our area, Chicago, Naperville, Elgin region. There's only 20, as we said, existing medical marijuana cultivation facilities. We do not have one in the community, nor do we have anyone approaching us at this time. Now, state licensing, so here's the first set of regulations as far as the regulating bodies. Under the state law, the Department of Agriculture is essentially in charge of most of the cannabis businesses, the cultivation centers, the craft growers, the infusers, the processors, the transporting organizations. The Department of Financial and Professional Regulation oversees the dispensaries. Now, as far as that second bullet point where it says non-compliance with local zoning rules is denial of a license. So in theory, if we had a problem, if we had a dispensary in town and we had a problem, we can report that to the state, and that could be reasons for denial, is the way we understand that, to renew their license. So if they were having any local issues, we would report those issues to the state. The next slide is taxes, and this is spelled out in the law, so it's basically, we didn't put it in here, but essentially, using North Aurora as the example, if there was retail sales here, you're looking at taxes of every purchase that can be anywhere from around 20% to around 38%, depending on which bodies have taxes on that they employ, and which types of cannabis are bought. So just to break it down quickly, you have a 7% state tax, then you have an excise tax that is on whatever level, and that's where we're getting into. So as you can see, it ranges depending on the level of THC, below 35%, above 35%. The stronger it is, the more it's taxed. The cannabis infused products, all of them are taxed at 20%. The county has the right to put an additional 3% sales tax. They also have the right to go to 3.75 in unincorporated areas. Municipalities, including non-home rule and home rule, have the right to employ an additional 3% sales tax. And then 8% of all the state taxes collected are put into the local government distributive fund, which, as you know, is a primary fund that the village receives money for state income tax allocations and the use taxes, so online sales and whatnot. So
let me just ask you, that's 3% was what we would
3% is what the additional tax that we can add in. Right now, we would still, it's our understanding that we would still get our 1% that we get through the state tax already. Bill and I would have to look into this. I believe that the medical marijuana side, I don't believe we collect on our 0.5% non-home rule sales tax because it excludes drugs and basically prescription drugs. So with that being said, I don't know if the 0.5% non-home rule tax that we have applies. So we would be anywhere from 4 to 4.5% if we had allowed recreational sales in our community and instituted a 3% additional tax.
Do we know what that equates to? What ounces, or what's the what on all that? Do you know?
should be about $500,000 a year by my calculations.
So we don't have any hard numbers that we received. PharmaCann provide a letter that we put in the packet so that the public and the village board can see it. And in that, they do actually provide some numbers on what they generate in the state of Massachusetts. I believe they have a recreational marijuana facility there that also has a 3% municipal tax. So that number is in there. I believe off the top of my head, it's 300,000
That was for-
generated by that
That was for
tax.
6 months.
For 6 months, yes.
So.
And that community, incidentally, I looked it up I was curious how big the community was, and that's a 22,000 population municipality. So
Big number.
So we
It's
don't know what
similar
an
to- a
ounce
little
goes
bigger
for
than
or
us.
anything, or what they would be is it per ounce or?
No, I have no idea what the
And is
cost
it
per
regulated
ounce
across
will
the
be.
state, the same price all over? Is it?
I don't believe so.
Market
I mean, I could be
driven or-
wrong. I mean, PharmaCann is here at the end of the presentation if you have some questions about that. I do not know how the individual dispensaries will price. I don't know if I didn't see anything in my discussions with staff that said that the pricing was regulated.
Would there be any way that we can set up some sort of presentation with the dispensary? Or,
Well, they have it now. You can go in there and see what they
Okay.
charge. Just ask them.
So, I mean, be honest with you, some of the information that we get is we can contact other states that have it. I would think that that's a good way to do it. And the dispensary is, obviously, they're here. They can answer questions. Tonight, because this is our first conversation, I thought the best way to do it was to go through the state law itself and not get into the dispensaries themselves. I mean, we can definitely have them do a presentation, but at this point, I want to make sure that the village board fully understands what's in the law itself. And then we're going to look for direction at the end. That being said, under local control and zoning, so we have the right to prohibit recreational cannabis businesses within our jurisdiction. So we have the right to say we don't want retail sales of recreational cannabis in our community. However, I do want to also remind you that that doesn't ban the actual use, once again, of marijuana in your community. You're just banning the retail sales of it. On the second part, the village can allow recreational cannabis businesses, and in there, we can do things to restrict it if it was allowed. We can create a special use. We can make it a permitted use. You can zone it with conditions. So that's the difference. If you ban it, you're basically saying, I don't want recreational sales. If you allow it, you still have the right to restrict it through different types of zoning uses. Right now, just as an added, we threw this in here, infusers and craft growers can't be zoned in residential uses. We're not even looking to allow those in zoning anyways. What we're talking about, once again, is just the retail sales tonight, to get that, because without the answer to the retail sales question, you wouldn't want to go down a path and start regulating every aspect of every type of cannabis business unless you knew that the village board was even interested in recreational sales first. Also, the village can allow recreational cannabis within certain businesses while prohibiting others. So that was my way of also making sure the board understood that you don't have to have recreational sales per se, but you could allow cultivation centers. So you have the right to actually say no to one and yes to another, or ban them all or allow them all. You have the right to do them individually by the use. And as we alluded to earlier, the on-site consumption under local control, you have the right, if you do allow recreational sales, to not allow them to use the product on-site. And we do have the ability to regulate and add some additional rules, and that, once again, could be something that we report to the state if they violate those rules. And one of the things there, I was trying to explain this, and I think the best way to explain the third bullet point is that when we say a local on-site premises consumption license, we have the ability to essentially create a liquor license, but for marijuana. So it'd be the same process. We can create a licensing process at the local level as well if we wanted an added level of protection when we're vetting out a dispensary. So the last slide, and this is basically where we're at, we're not this direct. Does the village want to allow or prohibit recreational cannabis sales in North Aurora? What we really do is there's essentially three things for the board to consider, and the staff has talked about this extensively, so we should be able to answer a lot of, at least at the minimum, basic questions about zoning processes and stuff like that. But for the most part, what it comes down to is three things. If the village board wants to direct the staff that this isn't right for the community, that you don't want the recreational sales in our community, we would just simply go ahead and bring an ordinance forward to ban it. If the village board would like more information or more public input, you can always send this to a public hearing, in which case we would probably go straight to our plan commission and host a public hearing. We'd bring the results of that plan commission back to the village board at a committee of the whole, and then essentially, based on that direction, you would see which way that went. And then the third option would be the village board says, you know what, we are interested in recreational sales in our community. That would still go back to the plan commission. You'd still get your public hearing, come back to the committee of the whole with the results, and then if everyone was on the same page at that point and directed staff to go to the board, you would essentially go to the board to approve it.
I have a question. I was doing some research on this whole topic over the weekend, and how does the federal banking regulations affect the sale of marijuana? Because everything I read, a lot of these companies are 100% cash businesses, and as such, a lot of them are open to extortion, armed robbery, and things like that. And I actually saw one statistic that said 50% get robbed within the first 6 months. So for me, it becomes, okay, is this going to be a public safety issue? Do we now need to worry about the employees of these dispensaries? Are we going to have issues with mob influence, mafia influence, things like that? I mean, it's really quite interesting. The more you read about the bad things that can happen with a 100% cash-based business. So are we putting the cart before the horse, before federal banking regulations allow this to become, a digital currency acceptance, or where does it stand right now, and how is it going to affect us?
Well, the federal government is not going to allow it. It's against federal law. This is a state law. So any federal regulations you're still violating federal law. And that hasn't changed. And unless Congress changes it, that's not going to change.
Right, so now could this potentially be a public safety issue? Because now we have these cash businesses that could be open to security issues.
Well, have we had problems with the dispensary now? Any issues with the current? We have it going now. It's ongoing.
We have it down.
Medical.
Yeah,
We have-
but in
Right,
his
but now this is
statistic,
different
in the
apples.
presentation, he said there are 46,000 people in the state that are currently using medical marijuana. You're opening it up to everybody in the state of Illinois that's over 21. So that I don't think that's a fair
Well, yes, it is
analogy.
fair because it's legal, and if it's not sold here, it's going to be sold in another community. It's going to be sold. It doesn't matter. It's going to be. You don't have to enforce it. But let me tell you that if you want to leave that big number on the table, I'm calculating at least $500,000 on the low end in tax revenue.
No, I agree with Mark. We're going to make a lot of money from the tax revenue.
need
for sure, and
infrastructure.
that's
We need stuff
certainly
done.
a positive. I do have some concerns, though. Do we know if Aurora itself has a medical dispensary?
Yes.
They do. All right.
Don't they?
I don't believe Aurora has a medical dispensary.
Here,
One advantage we have with moving on it in a positive light is that we have this medical dispensary, and we'll be able to establish that known thing that the reputation or it's good for marketing. In other words, all the sales will be coming here. The downside to that is what kind of clientele will it draw? That's a concern that I have had. Is there any information or data on that? What kind of what kind of personnel or what kind of clientele, dispensaries will attract?
I honestly don't know if you can.
To me, that's
it's
the
open
only
to anyone
downside,
21 and older.
Is that if we're the only community now? I think St. Charles.
There's one other
has
community.
one,
Yeah, St. Charles would be the other one that has a medical dispensary in this region.
and they're weighing it tonight. So I think we're kind of in the catbird seat to act on this. Myself,
we have a lot of
I'm
needs in
open
our
to
village.
Pursuing or
A lot of sales.
going forward on it. Right.
A lot of revenue on that one. It's a big number, and we need
Right.
infrastructure. We're looking at sewer mains. We always got stuff that we need
It would
spend
be
money
quite,
on. Let's put it this
financial
way.
benefit
We're not
to the
going
community,
to,
to
we're
the
not,
village.
we can use the extra revenue.
Well, we're still going to get revenue from the state, from the overall use of marijuana throughout the state, whether we're not going to get the 3% necessarily, but here, I think there's more.
$500,000.
It's more than just money. There are legitimate concerns about people that are drawn to these places. I have some concerns about what's the minimum safe level if we're going to do on-site consumption. You said 30.
It's state law already.
Well, but it doesn't matter. We have the right to restrict it.
Yeah.
Just because it's state law doesn't mean it's a good state law. 30 grams of marijuana is 45 joints. 45 joints, if that's accurate, is a lot of marijuana. How much you have to set a minimum amount that you're going to allow on site, if you're going to allow on site, and all that money that's on the table, we're going to be spending on our police to add officers and patrols, because you're going to have people coming into North Aurora specifically for the purposes of buying drugs, and whether you're in a suit or you're on a street corner, it's the same clientele. Just because it's legal doesn't mean that we should just automatically jump in and adopt it. This is different than the riverboats, where Aurora and like Elgin and those ones that jumped on it right away and they made all that money. I'm all for that, because if somebody spends their life savings, the only person they're hurting is themselves. But if somebody leaves, smokes a joint on site and goes and kills a resident of North Aurora, is there a dram shop in the law? Those are questions that I have before we just jump
But
in.
you have the right to
adopt it.
ban it on site. So you do have the right to ban consumption on site.
Yeah, on that point, Mark, I don't know if you read the letter, but they're not asking for on-site permission. They just want to sell and take it home.
Well, that's just a specific
This
pharma
particular
can,
one,
but
right.
I mean, we're talking about creating an ordinance.
Well, we have this option
possibly
to create that. We have this option to create that very ordinance.
Right.
Let me ask you this, Steve. Can other places apply for a permit to just smoke it on site, even if they bring it? Like, for example, some of those
No, right now, the
bars
only
or
place to go-
tobacco shops?
No, the only place you can smoke it right now is private residences, legally,
Okay.
under this law. Basically,
Out in your hayfield.
and that's the issue. In all honesty, Trustee Carroll, that's what Chief and I have talked about. The mayor's talked to us about it several times, is banning consumption on premises. You know, from the staff opinion, I mean, right now it's up to the board, but if you were to do this, I mean, that would be one of the recommendations staff would have immediately. It would be ban consumption on premises, absolutely. The issue with this law, what's different is, once again, we go back to video gaming. With the video gaming law, if one town banned it, someone else can go to the next community and gamble and then come back home to a community that doesn't have video game machines. But in this case, just because you don't buy it in one town, someone could still buy it in the next town over and still smoke it and then drive to your community back. So it is a little different than the gambling law in that sense.
You want to make the water flow up the river. It's just, it doesn't make sense. We already have a dispensary, so.
We have a dispensary, and to your point, and I see more people texting and watching her driving when they're driving than I see accidents happen with people texting. I mean, accidents will happen. I'm not saying that there'll be less accidents with it, but certainly if we ban it, there's still going to be people driving through our town.
Sure.
I agree with Mark, though. I am all for allowing it to be sold, but I am against on-site consumption. I think that's going to be opening up a can of
Oh,
worms.
no, I wouldn't, yeah, we'd never have that.
Right. But I do still, I mean, going back to the point I was making, I mean, how are we going to make sure that revenue is being collected if it's all cash business?
I think that's slacking. I think that's slackening up. I did a little research too, and there's some medical marijuana places that can accept credit cards now. I don't know how they're doing that, but there's some changing in that kind of a thing. I don't know.
Well, it's-
The thing is, as we move into the future, I'm convinced the federal law will change, and I'm convinced that this will move more and more like alcohol. I spent 36 years as a professional therapist doing drug therapy, and my personal experience was that alcohol does a heck of a lot more damage to an individual and to their family than marijuana or cannabis would do to people that just stayed with with marijuana. So it's not all as dangerous it's as dangerous, if it's dangerous, as alcohol is my opinion on the whole thing. So since it's legal, and it's one of the worst drugs in terms of debilitating and making individuals physically sick as well as socially and psychologically sick. So that's alcohol. Marijuana seems to be a little bit less of a toxic kind of thing on bring out a less toxic kind of response on the individual that uses it. So I'm kind of for it, but I do share Mark Carroll's concern, but I just don't know what clientele will be, what kind of traffic will be coming into our community, that's all.
So let me answer the point. So every marijuana cultivation center, when they move it to the dispensary, it's all monitored by how much portion-wise, ounces, pounds. They know exactly how much that's sold and what it's worth. That's how we get our tax revenue. So they know exactly what's purchased and sold. I think we need to keep in mind the future. The direction I've noticed, and I think everybody here has noticed, the direction is it's getting less and less of an issue in terms of illegality. And, what are 10 states now that have it legal or something? 13.
13? Okay.
Mike, can I ask you a question? To your point, do you think that the use of marijuana was less of a problem because it was illegal and it wasn't readily available? Would that have anything to do with why?
I'm talking about the impact it made on the individual using it, Mark. It's a much more benign drug to put into your body than alcohol is. I'm not saying it's good to do necessarily,
right,
but I am saying that it's a more benign drug on the individual. In terms of impairment, like driving and things, I can't answer that. I don't know. To me, alcohol.
Well, it's legal, so we can't really answer the question on driving. I look at if we have a dispensary and we don't allow it to be used in that dispensary, that people are going to come and buy it and they're going to go home. It's just like the people that come to the riverboats to gamble. What do? They gamble and they go home. People that come to the off-track betting for playing the horses, they gamble and they go home. So I think that the people that are going to come and buy marijuana and go home, especially if they can't smoke it there and they can't smoke it any place in public. So, and they're going to buy it someplace.
Yes.
Precisely.
I mean, Chief, I'd like to hear a little bit more your opinion on this. You're the chief of police, and you're the one that your department's going to have to deal with it.
I got a lot of the same concerns that all of you have mentioned. Number one being what you mentioned, smoking on site. I'm absolutely against that. I was, to be honest with you, against the making it legal in the first place. But since it has, I'm of course not a voting member of the village board, so if it were to come into town, I would like to see it heavily regulated, if that's the most that we can do if we were to have it in town. I'm concerned about locations where it would go in. I would prefer it to be nowhere near residential areas. I know that you have to be, I think it was 1,000 feet away from certain areas as it is. So, that limits certain areas where it can go. That's some of my concerns. But I see the flip side of it as well. If people are going to drive into town and buy it and drive home to smoke it, as long as they're not smoking it, at the business, because you're going to smoke it and you're going to have to leave at some point. So, absolutely not do that. The state went and made it legal. There's absolutely nothing I or anybody else can do about that at this point. So if it is in town, like I said, I would like to see it very heavily regulated as far as, where it can go, the rules they have to follow to sell it, the physical security of the business and inside and outside the business, things like that. So if it were to come into town, I think we'd have to take a hard look at how the business would be run within what we're able to do and how we're able to regulate it.
So just to point out to Dave's point, to Chief Fisher's point.
I didn't hear you, Steve.
To Chief Fisher's point, we've talked several times. The chief, myself, the mayor's been involved in our conversations. We've had lots of conversations with Mike about zoning. And there are so many scenarios that can play out should the board direct us that we purposely left all those considerations off the table tonight to try to get a pure discussion on whether or not you like the idea of selling it in town at all in the first place. Once you get that figured out and the board feels like you have a direction, and if that direction is to pursue that option or to get more feedback on it, I will tell you the staff is prepared to put a ton of regulations in place. So we have already talked about zoning districts that it would make sense in if the board took us down that path. We've talked about security measures, including maybe requiring cameras in parking lots, stuff like that, things that you would do in addition to what the state law requires to try to make sure that everything was regulated to the nth degree. And that being said, so right now, I think it's important to also know that the staff already put together a map of all the locations in town that they could even locate in. Based on the 1,000-foot rule, we know between daycares, schools, and libraries, we know, and apparently arcades is on the list, but so in all those areas, we took them, put them on a map, put a 1,000-foot buffer around them, so we know which areas in town they can be in. Essentially, they can be in a small section of Route 31. They can be in a couple pockets like the town center. It looks like they can be in the Clock Tower Plaza, which they have already stated in their letter is where they would like to move to. They also have the ability to move into a couple small other pockets in town, but for the most part, it's very limited in the area, and we have the ability to limit the number. So we can limit to one if we want to keep only one, if that's what the board wants to do.
Okay, what I'd like to do is, ask Bill what his opinion is on, is 300 to 500,000 a year in extra revenue, is that a significant addition to our overall budget, or how would that help a great deal or a tiny bit, or can you comment on that, Bill?
Yeah, I can't give you estimates, fairly about what it would generate. So I can't tell you if it's 5 figures or 6 figures, or whatever that might be. But that would be a fair sum of money. I think there's obvious questions. What are there any additional costs that the village might?
Well, I'm just basing my question on that information, the data or the information in their letter when they set out in Wareham, Massachusetts, of a community of 22,000. They first 6 months generated $300,000 for the city, and which is $600,000 a year for that city if it keeps up at that level. And I'm wondering if that's, in your opinion, is that a big significant amount compared to the rest of the budget, or?
Yeah, $600,000. That's about 5% of general fund revenues right now, if you're trying to put it in comparison.
That's what I was.
This way, we can use it and we will spend it.
Yeah. I think the financial boon to the village is certainly something we should weigh in on this decision.
So,
Sir, with Dave.
a couple of my hangups is it's just so new, like some questions tonight, we can't even answer, and I just think to have some education, a little more in-depth information, I think it'd be better for all of us. For me, yeah, the revenue's good, but revenue shouldn't drive everything. So, I do like the idea of not consuming it on site. I even like the idea of having an industrial some other spot. I don't know if it needs to actually be out in front next to a restaurant, because people are going to find where it's at. So they may limit some of the issues. What just concerns me is, like I said, we don't have the crystal ball, as Mayor Berman always says, and sometimes, you think you got everything covered, which we don't even have half the information. A lot of these questions, we don't even know. I do like the revenue. I think everybody will agree there. But just some of the unknowns just haven't answered everything for me yet,
So what I would like to do is, before we continue going down with the path we're at, is we don't have, if you want more information, it doesn't have to go to Plan Commission. We could try to get more information, bring it back to Committee of the Whole first. It's really up to the board what kind of information that you're looking for. Like Trustee Lowry, to your point, I don't think there's any legitimate way we could ever determine what clientele, who it would draw in the North Aurora, because it's legal to anybody 21 and over. So, I mean, that's a huge chunk of the population.
Well, if you think about it, Steve, I mean, what kind of clientele does a bar lures? I mean, it's the same question, right? I mean, it's unpredictable, right? You can have somebody in a suit walk in, or you can have somebody in flip-flops and shorts, right? How you regulate a bar? You want to own a bar, but you can't consume alcohol in it? It's kind of pointless, correct? So it just, I think we may have to look at some of the similarities that we have with some of the liquor licensing and others. Alcohol impairs you that much more, I would think.
I think it's naive to think that somebody's going to come into North Aurora, buy a bag of gummy bears or a joint and not smoke it in their car every single time. We have 1 million laws on the book in this state. We have 1 million DUI laws and whatever else. People break them every day.
Certainly.
And so the idea that somebody's not going to pop a gummy bear the minute they get in their car and drive off because it's illegal, that just doesn't make sense. I think it's naive. Maybe 90% of the people will, but it's the 10% we need to worry about. And that's my concern is not just about the fact that it's on-site consumption. I would like to see them banned in our village. The revenue is, to me, it's not worth the risk to our residents from a public safety standpoint.
But they're still going to, I mean.
They're gonna do
But they could drive by Randall.
They're still going to drive in your neighborhood or
They might.
wherever. Well, they will.
They might.
They're going to, yeah.
They're going to be driving on our streets regardless.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I look at.
I don't know if the risk, I think the risk might be exaggerated here, Mark, too. It's like a liquor store. They go, if you go buy liquor at a liquor store, do you drink your beer on your way home?
No, but a lot of people do. I mean, the chief can attest, a lot of people do.
Do they?
A lot is a,
There's a lot of DUIs in this state every year. And the DUI laws just keep getting stricter and stricter. And there's a way to measure alcohol. There's no way to measure the minimum safe standard for consumption of pot right now. So that's more about the state law than about, but I'm against it in our village. I know the revenue would be a huge windfall, but I'm just, unless somebody convinces me otherwise, I have a hard
That same
time.
analogy, though, if we didn't have any bars, what you're saying, we wouldn't have, I mean, people are going to go somewhere and then drive back to their community impaired, right? I mean, is that what you're saying? You thought, but you feel better if it wasn't in town, that wouldn't happen? I mean, if we didn't have any bars, I mean, they'd be going to Batavia or Aurora, and they are coming back, I mean, to town to live, so I'm just trying to rationalize what you're saying as far as not having a dispensary. Well,
I think, probably there's some attitude that exists that maybe none of us are really in favor, or some of us are not really in favor of legalizing the use of marijuana on a recreational basis. But it's a law now.
Yeah.
People we elected to represent us went to Springfield, and they're the ones that voted and said, hopefully they think they're reflecting the feelings of all their constituents. Hopefully they are. But they're the ones that voted for it. They approved it for the state. So therefore it's legal. Now we have to govern it, which we can from the standpoint of, I think we have better control if they're selling it in our neighborhood than we have if they're selling it in somebody else's neighborhood. That's my feeling.
I agree. I agree with you.
So, but I don't think, I'm certainly not in favor of recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd like to comment on Mark. Mark, I'm going to share the impact that alcohol has on an individual. First thing that goes is judgment. Your judgment is off. So you're not making good decisions as a driver. Then your equilibrium and your tunnel vision comes into play. So your perception or your perspective and your perception is hampered or impaired. Unlike marijuana, where what the biggest impact is a kind of like a forgetfulness, or they'll tend not to pay attention to kinds of things, but their driving skills and those kinds of things seem to stay intact. Are you with me on that? Do you agree with that, or?
No, I don't. I don't agree
What's
with
your
that,
opinion
Mike.
on it,
I don't, because there is a level of impairment when you have marijuana in your system, so.
No, I'm saying, yes, I'm saying there's a level of impairment, but it's a different kind of impairment in terms of severity of control of an automobile or any kind of machinery kind of a thing. Just like
To me,
walking.
impairment's
That's why
impairment, so.
you can have somebody on alcohol walk the line and they'll fall off, but with marijuana you can't tell. You see, that's one difference kind of a thing. So I'm not saying it's not dangerous, but it depends on how much you use.
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess I'm trying to help you with that. The risk may not be there as much as you're thinking it is, although there is a risk. I want to make that clear in terms of safety and things like that. My big concern with risk is the type of clientele that will draw into our community. If they come and they leave, I guess that's okay. And then again, maybe it isn't even going to happen. I don't know. So I say we pursue it.
I say, me too.
And look more into it, and certainly not shut the door, at least not tonight, on the whole idea.
Well, we're not going to shut the door.
And I just want to remind everybody again, no one's looking for, we don't need definitive direction on ban or allow tonight.
No.
We have the ability to go back and get more information either way. And if the board, but what I would ask is this, if you want more information, I would like to know what kind of questions you have.
What kind of information do we need?
Yeah, what would you like me to actually try to get some more research on?
I would like to hear statistics on alcohol, alcohol causing accidents and versus marijuana or cannabis causing accidents. In other words, what's the accident rate where alcohol's involved compared to the alcohol,
I can give you a few things, Mike, just really quick. These are some studies out of Colorado. They had it in 2013. Since recreational marijuana was legalized, marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 151% in that state. Traffic deaths involving drivers who tested positive for marijuana more than doubled from 55 in 2013 to 138 killed in 2017. There's quite a few of them here, but that just kind of,
well, is that because
people
more
are definitely driving
Is that because more
stoned.
people are using it, or?
Yeah, I would assume when the law passed that more people were using it. So of course the numbers are going to go up, but that's probably going to happen here too.
I would like to hear it compared to alcohol-related accidents.
I'd have to do some more research on that.
I like to know, like to Mark Carroll's point, as far as criminal issues, before and after, somewhere in some community similar to ours, what kind of issues they have.
To your point, exactly, that's a good point. Like the town that you said was 22,000 population, I'd like to know if they had to increase their police force and by what numbers to enforce that. That would be good to know.
Yeah.
I know as a state, and again, this isn't comparing, apples to apples necessarily as far as like what Mark is mentioning for, the town in Massachusetts, it's just slightly bigger than ours. That would be a good comparison, but in Colorado, since 2013, their violent crime increased 18.6% and property crime increased 8.3%. So, crime did go up. Which is interesting because the national trend has been crime actually going down, but that went up. But again, it's not necessarily apples to apples. It would be beneficial to compare, like a town our size to a town, or to compare us to a town our size that does have it, and what happened. Maybe nothing happened. You never know.
Listen, selling it and using it are two different things.
Sure, absolutely it is. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true.
Just a lot of unknowns.
When video gaming came out in 2009, I believe, I was charged with, one of my responsibilities was I had Economic Development Commission ask me to contact 3 states that had video gaming machines already allowed by law, and in a similar sized town. So I ended up having to call South Dakota, Oregon, and Montana. And I had to find 3 similar sized towns. And I called the police chiefs, the city managers of those towns, whoever I was able to get a hold of, and I asked them some basic questions, and it sounds like that would be similar to what maybe the board is interested in. Maybe, Colorado's one state, so I mean, we could always call Colorado because they're kind of the case study, but I mean, there's 10 other states. We can try to find 2 or 3 towns our size to at least get just a feel for if they're similar sized community, what kind of impact they had, and bring that back as part of the next discussion.
That would depend on even the surrounding towns, though. I mean, you may not even get a good read on that, depending on what you got next to you, or in 20 miles or 50, whatever the distance between all these places are.
The only thing I worry about, I want the board to have as much information as you need. My only thing is I'm not so sure, very specific things like, I'm sure we'll be able to find something, but I'm worried that we're not going to find exactly what, the exact percentages of alcohol versus marijuana and all that. But we can try. I mean, the chief would know how to find crime data like that. We'll do our best to see what we can come up with. Criminal issues, that's not too bad. That's a phone call to those communities and just. And you said, you're right, it's all relative to the surrounding area. Just because a town is 20,000 doesn't mean it's surrounded by all rural areas. It could be surrounded by 800,000 in population right around it. So it's a hard read, which is why comparing to Montana and South Dakota wasn't necessarily the most accurate.
Now, let's say we do this and we want to tighten something up. Can we do that? Not when we realize, we should maybe adjust something, or we kind of...
So I would put that to Kevin. What I would say is this. If the board chose to go down that path and you talked, let's first, zone it where you want it and then put all these regulations in and you put them in the code and then you also you make it a special use and you put all these conditions in the special use. Special use requires by inherently the board and the plan commission the opportunity to add additional conditions. So you already have those checks and balances, but I would also go to Kevin, our attorney, and ask him, but I would think if we set up a licensing process, we, just like liquor licensing, and essentially would also be able to put in additional provisions in case the state law changed or in case we wanted to change our regulations after a special use is granted.
Later, we're like, we missed that by a bit, whatever it is. So
we may be preempted to a certain extent.
Yeah.
That's something we'll have to look at to see whether we have any, to what extent we have that local control and to what extent that local control is really kind of in the licensing authority, which is the state. And certainly if we allow consumption on the premises, we could do licensing like we do with alcohol, but if the board doesn't go in that direction and yet still is leaning toward allowing cannabis businesses, I'm not sure the scope of our regulatory authority, so we'll have to check into that.
Well, and then my question would be, is there a maximum we could set for the license fee? Can we charge $10,000 for a license fee?
I think the answer to that is no, on the basis that we're a non-home rule authority and and that would be a tax, and we don't have taxing authority that isn't given by the state.
Well, we do have control where we locate it.
Yes. Right. Zoning. And our control is limited to reasonable time, place, and manner. Don't know what that means exactly, but that's the way the law reads. So we don't necessarily have to stick with the 1,000 spacing or
1,500 it was.
1,500. We could make it more, but it has to be reasonable. What is reasonable? I don't know.
So back to his point, so then right now there's only so many allowed in the state, is that it? But it could be...
There's 96 currently.
I mean, like maybe 5 years it could be 300. I mean, is that what we're thinking? So.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm concerned. It will be left behind if we don't act on it. If we
They're
fail
allowed
to act
to.
at all. I really think the trend is moving more and more towards legalizing this substance throughout the United States and certainly throughout these suburbs here. And that's my concern, is if we pass up this opportunity for revenue, keep in mind it's going to help our citizens here with our tax burden. And we're developing businesses for that same reason. This is a business, and it's a lucrative business for us. So I think we need to really weigh heavily on that very point itself. That's what I'm excited about.
Of course we should. I agree.
So
that's
I
why
say
we're
we
elected.
pursue it and find out all we can do and go from there.
So if the board is not willing to make a decision in a direction either to ban or allow, then I would think that based on the conversation tonight, it sounds like there's more information needed and to move forward. And
Well,
go ahead.
I'm
I
inclined
think
to.
if we need more information, we need to find out right now what information do we need.
Yeah.
I already told you mine, so I want to know the criminal difference, if we find anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, we could try.
Is that all?
I'm sure.
I'm fine
That's all
with
I can
it,
think of right now.
So my thought process would be this. You can bring it back to committee of the whole. You can send it to the Plan Commission. If you send it to the Plan Commission, both are obviously public meetings. Essentially the Plan Commission is a public hearing, is that correct? It'd be a public hearing. However, the only difference with that is you actually have a bunch of different ways to get information here. You can do another COW meeting. You can do the Plan Commission meeting in which Mike would meet with me and we would come up with at least some potential zoning options, and then the Plan Commission would hold a public hearing and talk about those zoning options. We can go over more information with the state law. Or you could essentially utilize the board or the Plan Commission for public purposes just to solicit feedback from the community as well before we even get into zoning. That's another option. So there's a whole bunch of ways to get more information. I just need to know what the board would like to do, and I'll make sure that we move towards that process.
Is our medical dispensary still even looking at applying for this license yet, or no?
Yeah.
Correct. They would like to locate in town, yes.
Oh, yeah. So I don't need any information. I got all the information I need.
Yeah, I'd be more inclined to proceed than not, so.
I'm not, like I said, I'm not asking
Why
for.
not? I kind of like the idea of letting the citizens, our residents, have some input on it and bring it to the Plan Commission. That's what I think we should be doing. Have a public hearing on it and see what our.
It goes to the Plan Commission. If the board wanted to pursue selling or wants more information, in either case, you can send it to the Plan Commission. You'd have to go to the Plan Commission to zone it if you were going to allow it. You would have to.
Do we need an ordinance if we're banning it?
Correct.
So we need an ordinance if we're banning it, and we need an ordinance if we're going to allow it, but it'll be much more with all our requirements.
Well, we have to zone it too, so you'd also essentially have to create, you'd have all the approvals at the board level for the zoning.
Right.
We allow it as a conditional use in a particular zoning area now.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you want to do the Plan Commission, but you want to specifically try to get more community input, we can definitely put it on Facebook too, invite the community to the Plan Commission meeting, ask them to speak if they want to speak. We can, there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do.
How you verify people on their Vicodins or Oxys or Xanax or anything else that is a
Same thing,
prescription
blood.
med? Correct. So you don't have a breathalyzer, you don't have an on-site test, so how are we going through and making all this so much out of the box? I mean, it's like there's tons of people that take a
under the
regular
influence of
prescription
drugs
every
or
day.
alcohol. Determine
Correct.
later what that is.
Yeah, if they swerve, they're driving it, not properly, it'd be improper use of a motor vehicle, you can pull them over, arrest them there.
Correct. So you need improbable cause, right? So.
Yeah, correct. Based on your observations and things people say, and it's the
outside of that-
totality of of everything.
So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, I guess I'm fine also, along with Mark and Mike. I think that at this point I mean, yes, we can set a regulation, but I'm okay with the approval of this.
I can't hear him. I can't.
said- okay.
I am okay with the approval of this,
Oh, okay.
ordinance to approve it. I think that there's so many other things out there that we're not even thinking about, and we're making such a big deal about something that we can't even change because it's already approved by the state. So, I mean, that's simple.
Well, there's a lot of emotion that goes in this kind of thing, and there's probably some moral feelings that you talk about gambling, that the emotions that came out of gambling because of the moral aspect of it. And I certainly lived through that in the past. And, those things go away because it's just everybody's feelings of it at the time.
Yeah.
It's not really what happens. I'm concerned about what we can do to police it as much as the chief and I have talked about that for probably a year anyway.
But that'd be that way if we sold it here or not. I mean, those issues are going to be there.
That's because of using it, not
Right.
because we're selling it.
Right.
I'd be inclined more to allow, if I had to vote now, I'd allow it, and then proceed from there is how I would be. But I still would like some feedback from the residents or citizens of the,
I'm for it. I think we need to.
yeah.
Mark, to your point, I think you're right that it's going to occur no matter what. But if you have a place that's attracting people, the risk goes up that there's going to be more traffic
My thought would be industrial and somewhere in and out. I don't know if I'd really want to see it next to, having, if that is the case if the crime does increase or what everybody's saying, but like Dale said, it's really selling versus using, and we may not agree with using, but we got to look at the selling part of it. And
So Mike and I just talked for a minute, and what we decided that might be an option for the board is based on the conversation tonight. It sounds like the board has a lot of questions, and what we think is before you go to the Plan Commission and you start asking, their opinion on zoning, the board needs to be 100% comfortable with whether or not you want to ban it or you want to consider allowing it. And in which case, we think what might make more sense before we go to the Plan Commission with just an open, idea would be to simply come back with, if we were to allow it, here's how the staff would put in regulations for it and propose regulations with some additional information that the board requested. Let you look at that. Then you decide from that, you can talk about the regulations or not, if it's enough, if you need more. And at that point, you can still make another decision on whether to ban it or to move forward. But it gives you a better idea of maybe what we at the staff level would do in the event that you were to allow it, what we would do with the police chief, with Mike, with myself, to regulate it the best we can.
Well, I don't think the board's ever going to be 100%
We're not going to be 100%.
on this
No,
issue.
we're not going to have 100%. So don't say 100%. We're not going to have 100%.
I mean, if you want to take it to the planning commission, and start the process, it is what it is. I mean,
It's not, we're never going to get 100%.
Right.
So don't even think that way.
I think if we brought it back here, it's just going to end up the same hearing that we just had, and nobody's opinions necessarily are going to change.
I would think that would be true. I really would.
Right.
But I feel the same as you. I'm really, same way about the medical, or not the medical, but well, you were in favor of the medical use of it, were you not?
Yeah, I was, because that's much more
it's a
controlled.
different
It's a
story.
prescription drug.
It's a different story. But it's a law now, and it's I don't know. I think, I love to see us in control of things rather than my neighbor have control over them for some reason, and therefore we get all the crap that goes with it, and they get all the benefits from it.
And no
And
revenue.
We've seen that in the past. So I would much rather be proactive and be the leader of it rather than
it's an interesting
holding
thought.
on to the tail wagging.
It's an interesting thought, though, like, talking about crime or those people that use it. And you may be surprised, who uses it. I mean, maybe that's how they felt back with Prohibition and
Oh, boy, hell
those
yeah.
people that, I don't know, I'm just devil's advocate, but I mean, it's all interesting, how,
Maybe our fears are unwarranted completely, who knows, I don't know.
I don't know either. That's the.
Well, it's not a perfect
But we have
world.
not
Yeah.
had any trouble with the existing medical marijuana thing.
No.
None, right? No issue
I think
at all.
everybody feels it's a blessing,
Yeah.
truthfully.
for those who need it. Yeah.
No.
Can't you just move it to the?
Yeah, we're never going to get 100%.
Planning commission and then bring it back?
But I think if the things we want answered, I think we need to get them answered. But other than that, I think we need to,
Yeah, he's fine with
need
that.
to make up our own minds.
Steve, I'm fine with that. If you want to go to the planning commission and skip the step of coming back.
Okay.
That's
So-
fine with me.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry if when I said 100% comfortable, I just meant comfortable to make a decision either way for each individual member. I didn't mean the whole board. That being said, if we go to Plan Commission, do you want the staff to then come up with potential zoning and regulations to give, so otherwise the Plan Commission is going to have no guidance whatsoever. It's going to be a free-for-all workshop type of environment.
First of all, we got to say that I think that we do not want consumption at the,
Okay.
where they have it. I think
Yeah,
that's-
those would be things
that's a
that I would like to know
consensus.
now.
I think that obviously we need some more discussion as to where we want to have it, where do we want to allow it.
Well, and one thing I'd also like to bring up is when you take a look at in the PowerPoint, it says that they could sell from like 9 a.m. to 10 p.m.
No, hours are different too.
Hours of operation. And that's another way we could.
That certainly is an issue that we-
Because I don't think 10 o'clock on a Saturday night's a great
I
time
don't
to
either.
be selling pot.
I don't either.
Yep,
It could be in business hours as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
yeah.
So I think those are the
we do have
things that
ways to limit
We
it
want to
and
give some
restrict.
direction to.
Yeah,
There's
we
no
have
reason
control
for it
of
to
that.
be open any later than the same as every other business that's in, well, I don't know, I guess the drugstores are open and other places are open.
But I agree with you. I think we got to have some sort of framework.
We do. So
Otherwise, it's just a free-for-all.
I know it's been a long conversation, but if you want some brief, very brief discussion about zoning, so I can tell the Planning Commission with Mike, based on where they're at now, we know they want to go to the clock tower, that's B2. They're currently in the B3. The B3 district is essentially Route 31. And do you want to? You can show the zone. So right now, they're essentially, once again, the B3, I think except for the Speedway by Clock Tower for some reason, the rest of the B3 district is essentially Route 31, the corridor from State Street down to Route 88 and a little bit south of that. B2 is all of our main commercial areas. This is the map right there. Those circles are the
map.
buffer areas that they would not be allowed to be in. So if you look at the bottom, you have the dark purple and the light purple. The light purple is B2. That's our general business districts. That's like the town center, the Woodman's area, Clock Tower Plaza. The B3, once again, that would be about by the police station and whatnot. And you can see the B3 is almost completely blurred out by the fact that there's daycares that are in that area. The other areas to consider, Trustee Gaffino brought up the idea of potentially looking at industrial. When Mike and I talked about industrial areas, you know, the real main one that we have in town is off of Airport Road, which is also by the police station. So you have the Airport Road corridor. Are there any thoughts in general about commercial versus industrial? Both? Would you be open to proposing all of it to the Plan Commission or reducing it to one area?
Let's say you just propose all of them.
Propose commercial and industrial?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we've got to give these businesses, you know, the flexibility to locate where they feel they're going to be the most profitable. We can't, I don't see how we can say a liquor store can open, you know, have free reign, but they can't.
Yeah, I agree. So,
Within this,
within the perimeter.
yeah, with the, okay,
I think that we have the basics.
Okay.
So, yeah.
all right.
Okay.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Executive session. To executive session to discuss.
Motion to go to executive session for discussion.
Second. The executive session topic is acquisition of...
Property acquisition.
Right.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So we're going to executive session. We won't return.